you here. Welcome. I think Kim did a good job of starting things off, but I want to start with hearing each of you define frugality.
Being good stewards of all of our resources, time, energy, physical space, anything that is a resource to us, being good stewards of that thing is frugality.
Yeah, it's really been a progression over the last 4.5, 5 years that we've done the show of what we define frugality, but definitely being a good steward of your resources and defining what resources you value most, and spending on those resources without guilt and saying no ruthlessly to the things that you don't value.
That makes a lot of sense. And that sort of dovetails into a mini conversation we were having earlier where you spent an extra couple minutes looking for free parking because you grew up in St. Pete's, and that's your baseline. And
I think it's a travesty. There's no more free parking in St. Pete.
Yeah, well, we'll work on that.
You did find it.
I did. Oh, yeah, I did. I can tell. Yeah. If you look, you shall find.
And Jill, coming from Philadelphia, you paid the $2 and thought you had a steal, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And it didn't start till 9 a.m., so I got to sit there for 15 minutes for free.
Yeah. And so, whenever you listen to people talk about, and people give advice on how to be frugal, it's really important to push it through that lens of what matters to you. I think that's what you were saying, because, sometimes earlier in your life, money means things, and obviously later in your lifetime, time may be more important. So, how do you create content to help people understand that, you may be talking about money, but it also may be time, and how do you help guide your listeners through that process?
Yeah, it's really a seasonal reevaluation. So I think a lot of what we're indoctrinated in is you have two choices. You can do all the way over here, or you can be all the way over here. And it's very weird to find people who are comfortable just being in the middle. And we call it the radical middle because it's very uncommon. So when you find that for yourself, you can say yes to the things that you want to spend money on and say no to the things that you don't want to spend money on.
I think we also haven't pigeonholed ourselves in the way that we've set up our podcast and our business, in that we can talk about a variety of things. We're not just these isolated people or experiences or categories. We are whole people where our emotions impact our finances, impact our relationships, impact our physical selves. And so when we start to help people be able to have conversations that recognize that integration and the congruence and the connectedness of all of that, it really resonates because that's our real life experience. It's not just, this finance podcast over here and that's all I need to be listening to. We need to have the understanding of finance and how that impacts our marriages and how that impacts our parenting. And so I think the way that we talk and the different perspectives that we each bring gives space for the listener to kind of find themselves in that and see the interconnectedness. That's
great. So is it fair to say then that the radical middle is something aspirational, that when people understand they may be going too far in one direction or the other, that ultimately the goal is to kind of find that, even though it may not be the same middle for everyone, but does everybody have a radical middle they should hope to achieve?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think it's the repelling of the extremes, which we can find in every category of life, of either or, and we're kind of advocating for a both and. How can we hold, we're rejecting the idea of balance, because the second you have it, it gets out of balance, but holding the tension of this one side, if we're talking about finances, this one side of being really mindful and considerate of the future and retirement, but also being mindful of, I have a life right now that I want to live. And oftentimes we'll live in either extreme of, I'm going to live under a rock now so that I can have a great 60 plus when I'm older, or YOLO. I don't even know if people say that anymore. I want to live life now. I want to go on all these cool vacations. I'm seeing all these people on Instagram. And what about if we could hold the tension of both? Of, yes, I want retirement, but I also don't want to live under a rock, and I want to do some really cool things right now as well. And that's going to be defined by everybody, what the tension is.
Yeah.
And you've both been frugal for a long time, and we'll get into that a little bit. But do you feel like frugality has changed? We hear now that the younger folks care about experiences more than possessions, and so do you find any kind of a trajectory of how frugality has evolved over the last decade or so?
Absolutely, and I think our whole goal is to redefine how people see it. Like it's this in personal finance, frugality really is like a nasty F word. Like people would just rather make money, like invest in stocks and real estate, not worry about like being frugal. But because we view it as like values-based spending and like good stewardship, that's how we want to redefine it. And even it's evolved for us. So we want to take it away from this thing that your great-grandparents and grandparents did, were washing out plastic bags and using the same one for 10 years. If something like that mindset, like extreme couponing in the early 2000s, we want to take it away from that and rebrand it into this beautiful lifestyle of freedom where you can feel confident about your spending. We're essentially teaching people how to spend. When you're viewing frugality as something as guidelines that tell you how to spend well, not just immediately tell you not to spend, there really is a freedom in that. And so that's what we're hoping to see frugality shift to even more in the future.
And you mentioned that a lot of emotion can be tied to frugality, and I would say a lot of emotion can be tied to brands. Brands are a signaling opportunity. They say, hey, this is what I find important. This is my status. And that can have, as with all things, can have different values for different people. So, when people are trying to decide what to maybe spend a little more on, spend a little less on, how do you help them understand, why they might spend a little more on something and be okay with that because it means something to them, even though it may not mean something to somebody else. Maybe they do want to, maybe a watch just needs to tell time, or maybe it needs to do a little bit more than that, with social signaling or whatever. So what's sort of the conversations you have around understanding that piece of it?
It is important for all of us to understand what our core values are, and maybe even some of the peripheral values around that, because that's going to inform what I can, without guilt, spend on. So my background is in social work. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, so we also talk a lot on the podcast about the emotions and the relationships and the mental health behind some of the ways that we make spending decisions. And so there is no, just take this quick 20 questionnaire and you'll know your core values. It really is a journey, but it does need to begin with a curiosity with self of, why did I buy this thing? Am I still pleased that I bought this thing? Is it actually bringing value to me? Is it connected to the things that I say that I value? And that's going to be looking at our spending. It's going to be looking at the way that we want to spend our time, right? All of our resources, how we're engaging with them. And if it feels as though, yeah, this actually aligns with what I want to be engaging with.
And I would say social media probably doesn't help that, because it's constantly throwing things out at you that you're seeing that is sort of shifting your field of judgment. And is that something that comes up?
Yeah, it's really hard to figure out what you want when you're seeing the life that everybody else wants. It's really hard to parse out, is this something that I want to spend my money on and my time on? Or is this just something that looks really cool and is right for this person, but may not be right for me? So it is hard you do have to check yourself when you're on social media and ask these questions. And it's not easy, because social media is for vegging out a lot of the times. We don't want to use it as a tool for self-exploration. But yeah, personally, I'm not on social media, but it's because it's that much of a problem for me. But there are certainly people who can be on it and use it as a tool for that.
And so as much as you're comfortable sharing, can you talk about the decision process to jump off and how that kind of went for you?
Yeah, so it started just a few months ago, over the summer. But with this pregnancy, I'm 18 weeks pregnant, and so for the first trimester, I was shell of myself. Like I was very useless. And so it was just another thing that was like taking my time and clouding my judgment and my thoughts. So, even years ago when I was paying off debt, I was looking, that was that time in my life where everybody was buying a house, buying a new car, going on an international vacation. Like it was just that time where we were all single and making money for the first time. And I was trying to pay off debt. And I was not prioritizing these things over my debt payoff. And that was really hard. I had a lot of, like, I just felt it made me feel more miserable. And I was like, why am I going to make myself feel more miserable when I know I'm doing what I want to do and what I have prioritized in this season? It's not forever. It's this season. So I unfollowed people, and I was still on social media. I liberally unfollowed people. And I'm still friends with those people. I follow them now. But I just really had to get their life out of my life for a season. So that's how I did it then. And now I don't have time. I don't have time. So that's my reason now.
That's good. So let's talk a little bit about your journeys through frugality. Jill, yours is tinged with something I love about frugality, which is treasure hunting. You've been a thrift stores and yard sales and things. So can you talk about how that has been in your sort of DNA as you grew up?
Yeah, I grew up not accustomed to having a lot of money. I mean, we weren't in poverty, but it was definitely some hand-me-downs and leftovers over and over and over again every night. And so for me to get something new, it was thrift store shopping. My grandmother, who grew up in the Great Depression, that was like a fun Saturday out with my grandmother. Let's go to the thrift store. At the time, I didn't like it, but then as I started to get my own money, I thought, oh wow, there's no other way for me to get the things that I want other than secondhand. And so that was just kind of a part of me of learning how to do a lot with a little. Granted, through meeting Jen and having this business and this podcast, my definition of frugality has changed. I think I used to see it as a race to the bottom and almost took pride. It's hard for me to admit that in some degree, but here I am, in how little I had. There were years where my husband and I literally made below the poverty line in an effort to kind of build something greater in the future, but really did not make a lot as a social worker in those first few years. And so that was my experience, and it also became that mentality of, I think this is all that's available to me, and so I might as well make it work and wear it as a badge of honor then, because what else can I do? Until I started to realize, oh, there's freedom and flexibility that isn't me sacrificing my passions. I'm still in the field of social work. I don't have to leave that in order to also have the things that bring me joy and travel and do the things that are life-giving and beautiful. And that was a journey for me to kind of understand that. And it took creativity and problem solving and DIYing that I do think came from those deep roots of frugality and those early understandings. So my husband and I lived in an RV, not to be cool millennials who travel the world, but to have a house at an affordable rate for us at the time. Like I said, I grew up in Philadelphia, so prices of housing has always been pretty high. And so for us, it kind of meant doing some things that might be a little bit non-traditional to get after the life that we want, that has set us up well at this point and has helped me redefine frugality.
Yeah. And so now that you're in a spot where you can, buy sort of what you want, how do those roots make you feel when you go see retail? When you're used to being able to buy 50 of those things that you now see, at 50 times the price of a thrift store or a yard sale. Are you comfortable with that, or is it still an uneasy process?
Yes and no. It depends on what the thing is. I truly think that I have come to a point where I can spend guilt-free on the things that matter to me. So luxury vehicles and handbags, I couldn't care less about. So I'm not even going to give it a second thought. But a beautiful vacation, that's right up my alley. I'd love to do that. And so I can spend guilt-free on that kind of thing. So I don't really pay much attention to the things that I'm not saying I'm perfect or like I've totally arrived, but I think that I can spend on the things that I value at this point.
That's wonderful. And Jen, your journey, you've been deep into yours, a couple books out. Talk about how your journey to frugality.
Alternatively, I grew up rich on Snow. Just kidding. I grew up behind the Hardys on US 19. But yeah, I didn't grow up like loving being frugal. I did not like thrift stores. I liked to just spend money. And I thought because I bought generic at Publix that I was good, that I got money. And I learned very quickly when my husband and I started paying off debt that was not the case. Because I thought, okay, I just have an income problem. All I have to do is make more money. Because I worked as an acupuncturist for $35,000 a year over at St. Pete Community Acupuncture. So, and if you know that, you can get acupuncture for $20 a pop there. So we were banking. But I just thought, I just need to make more money and that'll solve my problem. And 2 months into that mindset where I was working 60 hours a week doing like extra jobs, I got shingles. And my body basically said, nope. And so I had to then start looking at the spending portion. It was just not an either or problem. It was an integrated problem. The problem was from both sides. So I, had to focus on making a little bit more, but that wasn't going to solve the problem 100%. And that was where my journey with frugality began. Looking beyond just, yes, it's a generic brand, but do I actually need it? Am I gonna use it? Is it in my meal plan or on the grocery list at all? So that was kind of my start. And then that kind of led into really wanting to share that with other people, because I knew if I was struggling with it, other people either were struggling with it or didn't realize they were struggling with it. And then it's just kind of evolved into all of this. Because I really, at the beginning, still thought that meant, I had to deprive myself. Getting control of my spending had to mean deprivation. And so it also became this journey of how can I control my spending and gain this freedom and not deprive myself? Because it's not like I want everything in the world. I'm a discerning person. There are things I want and things I don't want. So how can I figure out what those things are that I want, and probably more importantly, figure out what those things are that I don't want, so that I don't feel deprived in life, and I can still save and spend in a way I feel comfortable with.
That's wonderful. And then how did these two frugality paths intertwine? How did you first meet, and what was sort of the first few steps you took together as friends?
Our story of meeting is way cooler than how I met my husband, so I do love telling this story. At the time when my husband and I were living in an RV, while it wasn't to travel, we did do a few road trips, and so we, from Pennsylvania, brought the RV, stopped along the way, but St. Pete was one of the destinations. He had been a touring musician before and remembered St. Pete being a really cool area. So we stopped here. He put out something on Facebook, and this would have been 6 years ago,
2017.
Yeah, anybody in the St. Pete area want to hang out, thinking that his friends from decades before not a decade before would say, yeah, let's hang out in radio silence. But Jen and my husband had met a decade prior in San Diego. They had both lived there, met at a party, became friends on Facebook, as you do, and then never meet again. But she saw it. It must have come up in her feed somehow of St. Pete, anybody want to hang out? And so she also saw that no one was commenting and felt bad, I think, for us, and said, sure, friends and I are getting together. We're going to watch the sunset, and what was it, shots on the beach? My memory was champagne on the beach, and Jen's like, no, it was shots.
Shots at Jimmy B's.
Yeah. So we went, uncharacteristic for her to say, let's get together. Uncharacteristic for me being on vacation to meet up with strangers, but whatever, it was a 3-week trip, and my husband and I are in an enclosed space. Okay, I'll meet new people. So we get together and we hit it off. We shared fries, as frugal friends do.
Yeah.
And we ended up extending our stay because, well, we loved St. Pete so much and really enjoyed Jen and Travis. And I think we were able to connect and talk about finances. I know that's not a typical topic that people will discuss, but because we were doing the non-traditional living route, and that was to pay down debt and cash flow my master's degree. And Jen was in the process of paying down debt with her husband. So we naturally began talking about these things. And a year later, we started a podcast. There's more to it, but...
Yeah, those are the nuts and bolts.
That's the elevator.
After I said I'd never start a podcast because I'm a writer, but if I did, I love alliteration, so it would have to be called Frugal Friends.
And she sold me at that. She's like, I'll never. And then she said Frugal Friends, and I said, well, done, because I love it.
That was the deep, deep process that went into naming the show.
And so now I know if she ever says we're not doing that, that's never going to happen, it's a sure sign it's going to happen.
And that's why I don't say never anymore.
That's great. So what I take away from that is shots are on the meal plan for that counts.
Oh, yeah.
That's good.
Free shots.
Free shots.
Oh, free shots are on the meal
Free
plan.
sunset shots at Jimmy B's.
Do they do that anymore?
Yeah, I think so.
Oh, okay.
We've not been back since. Oh, okay.
So let's talk podcast life then. You started the podcast. It's not easy growing a podcast. How did the journey go? How did you promote it? How much time were you able to put into it?
So we started the podcast for a variety of different reasons. My husband is an audio producer and podcast producer. So part of it was his idea to say, I want to start something from the ground up for my portfolio. And so I was approaching it from this perspective of, I'll help my husband out. I'll get to chat with a friend. And it's not a topic that I would typically choose to talk about. If you would have asked me 4 years ago, do you want to start a podcast? What do you want it to be about? Personal finance would not even be on the top 10.
Probably still wouldn't.
Yeah, but, that might be true. But I knew, okay, I'm going to learn in this process. It's going to cause me to be reading articles and interviewing people, and I think helping me, while I mainly am talking in my living room, and that's more comfortable, hopefully I'll be able to gain more skills on being able to talk and eliminate the ums and the likes and become a better interviewer. And that excited me, that personal growth piece and connecting with a friend and learning more. For Jen, she saw it as a marketing arm for her personal finance blog at the time. So we approached it for different reasons, but none of us had it in our head, oh, we're going to grow this thing and it's going to become a money maker. I was just excited that like someone other than my mom started listening to it. So it kind of caught us by surprise. And I can't say, oh, then that's a formula, like trick yourself into a successful business or podcast. But I think that just the genuine motivation behind it and the enjoyment of it might have been a piece of that.
And is there something to be said for being not, a financial planner or a banker or something, and just coming at it from a more grassroots, self-taught angle that helps people identify?
Absolutely. I think one of the keys to our growth that we weren't planning or expecting was how connected our listeners feel to every episode. So featuring like a listener in every episode, and really like we'll get emails and reviews saying like, I feel like I'm just sitting down with my girlfriends, like over coffee. And that was our goal for the feel. But you can't do that as a super expert. Like nobody's going to feel that way if we were touting ourselves as super experts. We just say that we are a few steps ahead of our listeners in the journey. And of course, now after almost 5 years, where maybe we were 10 steps, maybe we're 20 steps ahead. But in any subject that we speak on, we never position ourselves as the super expert. We're confident in what we know, honest in what we don't know, and saying, if this has worked for me, it may or may not work for you, but here's an alternative. Didn't really work for me, but it may work for you. So just giving all of the angles, I think people really appreciate that. And people have said it's refreshing.
Content is often more accessible if we don't feel like an idiot when we're hearing it or reading it. And that was something for me in the finance space that it did intimidate me a bit, but I also saw a gap in the finance space, that it's often experts using acronyms that I didn't understand, but I felt silly asking people to clarify, but I thought maybe I could be the voice of that person who's like, what's a Roth IRA and how exactly does it work? And I think that that helps people to know these questions are okay to ask. And it's better for me to ask them now than to pretend like I know but never actually get a straight answer. And that's something that I think people have connected with, is giving the freedom and the space and the lack of shame to say, you can ask your questions, and if we can answer them, we'll answer them. Otherwise, we'll bring in an expert, an actual expert.
Yeah, it's great for me to have one foot in the world and one foot out of it, because I have no formal degree or certifications in finance. I only have real world experience and years of writing in personal finance, which has led to years of research. So whenever I come across something that I am confused on or maybe have forgotten, like for years, I always confused premium and deductible and insurance. And I was like, if I've been writing about insurance for 5 years and I still confuse those things, we should probably do an episode on insurance where we clarify that. So like, it's cool to have like one foot in, one foot out, where all day I'm researching personal finance and I can really quickly pinpoint the things that maybe I am not like 100% sure on, and we can translate, and we could just do episodes on those things.
So now you have an accidental or not so accidental business. You actually have an opportunity to make revenue. You've got a little shop where you've got a workbook companion to one of your books. How has that felt, and what are you doing now to actually turn it into the best business it can be?
We really had to look at the unique audience that we have. We have a high volume, low cost business model, whereas most podcasters have a low volume, high cost business model. So the podcasters that are really making it, they may not have a ton of listeners, but they have high ticket courses, high ticket coaching, stuff like that, monthly subscriptions that can bring in multiple thousands a year from one customer. And we just don't have that. We charge, we started a Patreon at $5 a month, and I got an angry email from somebody like $5 a month. I am so disappointed. That was Laura. So we just had to look at our unique audience. It doesn't mean that we couldn't monetize that. It just means we had to be creative. We have done for several years a free virtual summit where we have brought a high volume of people in for free and then given them the chance to purchase an all-access pass that has, yes, all the videos of the speakers, but also a bundle of products where they're getting a lot of products for one price, which is something that appeals to our audience who cares about value. So we've done that, and then we've also done a partnership with iHeart Podcasts. So we are now in the iHeart Podcast Network, where they handle all of our advertising. So we're like, if we want to make the big bucks, we got to take money from the people with the big bucks. And those are not our listeners. So that's why we kind of went the network route. And so they have been assisting us with some exposure, like the cold traffic exposure, and then also filling our ad spots on the show. So those have been the two most successful ways. And we've had some workbooks and some low-cost digital products too, which have been kind of icing on the cake. But those are the two revenue streams that we have found most effective for our audience.
And it does inspire one other follow-up. You mentioned getting that email about the $5. And anytime you do anything noteworthy, anytime you build a community, There's people on all sides of it. You can't do anything noteworthy without having some people just not like it. And so, how have you steeled yourself to growing attention, growing opinions, having to please a larger and larger community, people feeling ownership over you because they've been with you since the beginning, all of those unique sort of aspects of it. How has that journey been?
That's an ongoing one. I can't say that, I have the thickest skin ever. And that surprised me because, again, I entered the podcast space thinking this is just something fun I'm doing in my living room. And then all of a sudden, not all of a sudden, but 2 years down the road, we're starting to get people who are really angry about some of the things that we're saying. And that really shook me initially because I am accustomed to being able to ease relationship when I'm engaged with people one-on-one or maybe even in a group setting. But this is someone who I have no access to. I can't explain myself. They may be getting one picture of me and attacking. And the worst part for us, at least, or me, I should say, is when people attack for things that have nothing to do with the business itself. Like, I don't like your voice. Well, I can't change that. I don't know what to do about that. Okay, thank you for that on a Monday morning. And so, I think you do become a little bit more accustomed to it, but also learn what you can engage in or can't engage in. I have stopped reading our reviews. I can't do that anymore.
Yeah.
There was a time when we read our reviews on the show, but then in order to do that, then we've got to see the 1 stars, and that was really difficult. I love constructive feedback, but sometimes the emails can be really difficult. I think it has helped to have a partner in it where we can kind of ease each other. If I'm more upset about it, she can be the voice of reason. If she's more upset about it, I can kind of ease. And then we can choose who's going to handle this or respond to it or not respond. Sometimes you don't need to. But I think what helps too is reminding ourselves of the people who we have helped. So I think it could make me think, I never want to do this. But then we also get the emails of people saying, this content has really shifted the way that I engage with my husband, and like our marriage is thriving now. I mean, not because of us. They put in the hard work, but some of the things that they've been called to look at and consider has really shifted things for long term in their lives. And I think those are the things that help me keep a true north of there is something really great happening here. And I'm open to seeing areas of growth, and I want to make it better and better. But all the other stuff that's just noise, like learn to take the meat, spit out the bone, has been one of my mottos.
Yeah. I think we were both surprised how thin our skin can be for 1-star reviews. But we have a virtual assistant who like filters through the emails and the reviews, but sometimes I'll catch one. And for every 1 negative, there's always 5 positive. But we have this negative bias that, you remember the 1 negative and forget the 10 positive. So, I mean, we got a positive one yesterday, like an email, not even a review, just like an email from a listener. So it's, to focus on that is hard, but necessary. But I have a no respond rule to negative emails, except for that girl that was disappointed about our $5 Patreon. I responded to Laura.
Laura.
Did.
Poor Laura.
Not poor Laura.
Yeah.
She deserved it.
There is a certain sort of irony in selling products to Frugal listeners.
Yeah.
But,
but that's one of the things where you're trying to rebrand the concept of what you're doing. There are a ton of frugality bloggers that make great money with low-cost digital products, and it's easier when you're web-based to just have a link to click on. It's harder with podcasts because when they're listening in their car, there's no direct way to take action. So you do form this more intense bond with your listener, and you do create super fans faster than if we had a web-only presence. But it does take a little bit more repetition to convert. So that's another unique aspect of podcasting.
Would you mind being more specific about monetization and it's a free podcast, but you're charging some? And then also, what is your listener what is the volume of your listeners?
I'm just going to repeat the question real quick. So the question was about specifics on monetization and then their listener base.
Yeah. So we have a free show we release twice a week, and that is free for everyone. We also have several subscriptions. So we have a membership and a Patreon that are kind of just icing on the cake things. The main way we monetize throughout the year is being part of the iHeart Podcast Network. So we have a pre-roll, a post-roll, and 2 mid-roll ad spots that they sell advertising in. And we are paid on a revenue split with them. So our listeners never have to pay for the show. They never have to pay for any content that we produce unless it's maybe specific digital products and trainings that we're creating for our membership. And we're doing 30,000 a week.
Yeah.
Downloads.
Oh yeah, over 100,000 a month. I think we're
at 175,000 a month.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Oh, thank you.
75,000, right?
Per month, yeah, about 30 a week.
Over 3 million total.
Oh, it has to be over 30 a week then. Yeah.
Math, quick math.
Huh?
Are you getting monetized in cash that much?
No. No.
That's the play.
That's downloads. Yeah. No. That'd be nice.
So the question was on revenue per listener, essentially, or how to equate downloads to revenue.
Most podcasts, just the podcast, will make money off of advertisers. And so typically advertisers will pay on a CPM, cost per mil, meaning an amount paid per 1,000 downloads. And that really varies. You could be anywhere from $10 to $200, maybe even more.
Yeah, the
CPM.
more hyper local, more hyper specific, the higher CPM you can charge. But so I haven't broken it down. When we were doing our own advertising, I think we were charging a $50 CPM. We're less now because we're higher volume. And we do split, we do a rev share with iHeart. But yeah, I mean, we do have a minimum, and we just started with iHeart in May, so we're still kind of evaluating the profitability of the partnership too.
Profitability, how long did it take you to get?
2 years.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
We could have done it sooner. I'm glad that we waited just for our own sake. It wasn't hard to sell our show once we had built ourselves to that point. I think by the time we started to reach out to advertisers, we had at least 1 million downloads. You can reach out to advertisers before that.
Oh no, I think we had maybe 500,000.
Okay.
Yeah. No, we
could have done it sooner.
There are some people out there that will say you can't get an advertiser until you're 10,000 downloads an episode, and that's BS. Mm-hmm. You could have 50 downloads. Mm-hmm. If you could have 0. There are a ton of people that get advertisers before their show launches. If your show is hyper-targeted and hyper-appropriate for the advertiser, and if you can sell the advertiser on how your show is going to convert in whatever way, leads or customers that the advertiser's looking for. So, I mean, we had 3 sponsors for our first summit before we had ever hosted a summit, because we could tell them how we were going to give them exposure. We could tell them how we were going to convert leads for them. And we listened to what is already converting best for them and said, okay, that's already working for you. We'll do that too. So if you work with them, you can get it no matter how many downloads.
Sorry. So the question was, how do you listen to the podcast and how much time does it take to produce the show?
Everybody has maybe a podcast listener that they prefer. The tops are Spotify, Apple, that there's Stitcher, I don't know.
YouTube is growing as a podcast listening platform. So if you're wanting to start a podcast, start a video podcast.
Our episodes are about 45 to 55 minutes long, and it takes us about an hour to record each one. We really are, there's not a lot of fluff. What we record is what the podcast is. So for one podcast episode plus the research, maybe we're both putting in 2 hours per episode.
Yep.
Not a ton of time.
From the beginning, we've had an editor. That's been really important to our sustainability because that's not our gifting. And that was kind of why we started the show, was to give Eric something. And when Eric had moved on from editing, he just found somebody else for us.
So if I leave out of here and get in my car, how can I listen to y'all?
Frugal Friends podcast on Stitcher, Apple,
Apple,
Spotify.
Yeah, Yep.
See, I'm learning something.
Yeah, nice.
Spotify is the fastest growing podcast player for sure.
Yeah.
Mr. Greg.
Okay, I listen to your podcast.
Yay!
Not know it was this big. 2 or 3 every month, so that 1.4 cents, you're welcome to that every month.
Yes, thank you.
You touched on this a little bit earlier, but especially after having done this for so long and so many podcasts that everybody but Doug is listening to, how do you stay fresh? You've done a pretty good job. I don't know everyone, but so many podcasts just hit that wall.
The question is, how do they stay
Shower
fresh?
every day.
Yeah, Jill takes a shower, and I am in this all day, every day. Like, I am really in this, and I really can talk to you all day about like values-based living and how everything in your life touches money. And nobody's going to debate that. Like, literally everything in your life does touch money, whether it's cost money or whether it's due to the absence of money. So I love that concept. I could talk about it all day. So whenever ideas like just pop into my mind all the time. Also, we're always asking our listeners, what do you want? Because we have 250 episodes. We don't expect them to listen to all 250. So there are plenty of times where they're requesting an episode that we may have done 4 years ago, that it's like, okay, nobody's scrolling back that far. Let's just do an update because this is what people want. They don't know to go back that far. We'll just do a refresh. So now it's kind of a combination of those two things. But the whole time we've been doing the show, we've really honed in on what is a topic that people are Googling. So what are people we use the same search engine optimization like techniques you'd use for a web-based, like for an internet blog. We use it for podcast. So what are people Googling? And we just dive into, that H1 essentially on an episode. And for me, that was most helpful because when I started listening to podcasts, it's the only reason I would go. I didn't go for the people talking. I went to get a question I had answered. And so that's kind of a philosophy we've had. Like, people don't come for us. They stay for us, but they don't come for us. They don't care about us. So we make it a point to get into the content within 5 minutes. And if we're going to talk about anything personal, it's at the end of the show, like after the credits have rolled. So yeah, I think it's a combination of we ask people what they want. We have like a Google form that we email out. I just am a nonstop ideas, and then still like figuring out what people are Googling too.
Yeah, so the question was about managing relationships, family members who may have completely the opposite take on money than you do.
One of the things we like to talk about on the podcast is boundaries in a variety of ways, like boundaries with ourselves as well as in relationships, to provide freedom and space to play within those boundaries. And I think that's also connected to a values-based spending. That doesn't just apply to us, that applies to other people. So when we can come to a point of understanding, I don't value that, so I'm not going to spend on that. This is what I do value, so this is the way that I'm going to spend and engage with my resources. It gives space for each other. And so that's not to try and oversimplify something that can be quite complicated, especially in family dynamics where you can have arguments or expectations around the holidays of you have to get gifts. And so sometimes it can lead to difficult conversations, which we talk about that. What are some templates for engaging in these types of conversations? But I think when you're actually talking relationships where you're managing money together, I think one of the core key components is looking at it from values, because often we can move to judgment quite quickly to say, why would you do that? That's the worst decision possible, when we're not maybe fully connecting the dots that, oh, but that's valuable to that person. It's not valuable to me. So rather than move in judgment or shame, how can I value that for you and you value this for me, and we can kind of negotiate this process together. A lot more to be said about that, but I do think it comes down to acknowledging and caring for and valuing each other's values.
Yeah, a lot of it, there's a lot of grace involved too, because unless she starts asking you for money, there really is no right to judge, because we value different things, and there is no type of spending or thing to spend money on that's better than something else. Like, the things I spend money on are not better, or the things I don't spend money on are not better than somebody who's living paycheck to paycheck and over on a credit card. The spending is neutral. It's what it does for you as a person. And we honestly don't know what spending is doing for somebody who's not us. We don't know the backstory and the history and the emotions going on in somebody else who is spending money. So we have grace for people who spend in alignment with different values, or maybe don't know their values. And should they ever come asking us for money, then we can give an honest answer of saying, I really don't agree or align with the values that you spend on, so maybe try someone else.
Wonderful. With that, we are out of time. I think really appreciate it. Jen and Jill, I think we have a room of new frugal friends, and the podcast can again be found on all the major podcast platforms. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.